Here for, we don't want anyone shouting over another, no name calling, no insulting. We're here to learn from one another. You might disagree, that's fine, you can disagree, agree to disagree. No shouting, no screaming, and I don't need to tell you guys are gentlemen, Phil's a gentleman, and Jake, we know he's a gentleman as well. I'm going to leave the table to you guys. Whoever would like to start, go ahead.
Jake, do you want to outline the argument? And then,
Sure, okay, so you said you wanted to discuss the Kalam, right?
That's right, yeah. I've just released a video about it, so that's right.
Okay, so the Kalam cosmological argument says that whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. We agree to that?
Yeah, that's
okay.
Yeah, I agree.
So, where?
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
The last time we agreed.
I'll leave it to you.
Okay, so what's your concern with the argument?
Well, I think let's start with the premise that the universe had a beginning. I don't think there's any evidence for that.
Really?
Yeah.
On what grounds? Sorry, what do you mean?
But what is the evidence that the universe had a beginning? I don't see any.
You don't?
No.
So what evidence have you looked at to consider it?
Well, the main argument that I've heard would be singularity theorems.
Mm-hmm.
So a singularity in space-time is supposed to imply a beginning to the universe. Mm-hmm. But I don't think anyone takes singularity theorems. The singularity theorems were proven by Penrose and Hawking in mid-60s to early 70s. I think the main paper came out in 1970. Probably the idea was mid-60s. It had origins back in the 20s.
Yeah.
But neither Penrose nor Hawking, nor anyone else in cosmology, thinks that those singularities are realistic descriptions of the universe. They have assumptions that are not taken seriously. They were taken. I think they seem reasonable today. And certainly Penrose and Hawking abandoned the belief in the singularity theorems. But the people that advanced the Kalam seem not to have. They seem to not have caught up with the scientific change that's happened.
So what's your position? Do you have one, or you just say you don't know?
My position is, I don't think you can assert with any confidence that the premises are true. I'm not saying that they're false. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying we know the premises are false, but in order for the argument to work, you have to have reasonable evidence that the premises are true, and I don't think we have the evidence for that. Yeah,
well, I mean, right now we're just stuck on, we jumped the first premise. Do you think that that's true, or you don't know?
I don't know if it's true. I think there's certainly reasons to doubt it, but my main area of interest is in the second premise.
Okay, so let's just stick on that. Yeah. So, the universe had a beginning, right? Yeah. That's the second premise.
Yeah.
Now, you're saying that you doubt that.
I don't think there's any convincing evidence that it's true, and therefore the argument can't reach its conclusion with any confidence, and therefore it's not a good argument.
Right, but what I'm asking is, do you think that it's false, or you're just agnostic on it?
Yeah, I'm agnostic.
Okay, so you don't have a theory that you hold to that's opposed to the singularity theories. There's nothing that you really think is true in that regard.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, why is that?
Well, the singularity theorems that are supposedly proved, so people should understand that there's a lot of evidence that there was a Big Bang event, and I'm not disputing that for a second.
Okay.
Right? The universe was in a very hot, dense state. Mm-hmm. And back in the 1960s, when William Lane Craig, who sort of popularised the Kalam cosmological argument, he brought out his book in 1979. And in 1979, it was the view that the Big Bang should be coupled with these singularity theorems, proven by Penrose and Hawking.
Yeah.
And therefore space-time comes to an end at the singularity, and therefore the universe has a beginning. Mm-hmm. The problem is that in 1979, ironically the very year that Craig came out with his book, Alan Guth came up with inflationary cosmology, and that violates one of the conditions of the singularity theorem, and no one realised that one of those conditions would be violated. So therefore the joining of there was a Big Bang to there was a beginning to the universe, it was an illegitimate join, as it were. But more importantly, most cosmologists today, even if you say, okay, well that doesn't matter, we can get around that. There are other assumptions in the singularity theorems. So, for example, it assumes that the torsion of the universe is zero, but that doesn't have to be true. And in fact, there are theorems in physics that say it's not true. But most important, and it assumes there's no closed time-like curves. Maybe that's true, but we don't know it to be true. It assumes that you're dealing with what's called a Lorentzian space-time. So Lorentzian space-time in plain English means there's 3 space dimensions, 1 time dimension, and there's matter in the universe. But that doesn't have to be true. But most importantly, I think the biggest one is that it assumes general relativity, which is our best description of gravity, is valid all the way to the very high energy densities that you would get at the Big Bang. And I think almost nobody thinks that that's correct, because our theory of general relativity, which is our theory of large-scale structure of space-time, is in conflict with our theories of the smaller scale structures in the universe, quantum mechanics. And what almost everyone in physics thinks is the case is that we have to combine general relativity with quantum mechanics. Now, since we don't have so this is called a quantum theory of gravity. Now, we don't have a well-verified theory of quantum gravity, and so we don't know what happened. However, there are well-advanced contenders for quantum gravity, so things like string theory, loop quantum gravity, and so on, and they seem to say there was no singularity and that the universe existed before the Big Bang. Now, I'm not saying that's definitely right, we don't know yet, but they seem to be our best contenders at the moment. So our best contenders are that the Big Bang was not the beginning, but I'm not saying that's something we know to be true. It's just the best ideas we have at the moment.
Yeah, maybe I wasn't clear.
Okay.
So my question is not why you don't believe in the singularity theories.
Okay.
Why don't you believe in any other theory?
Well, because in order to understand what happened at the Big Bang, and whether there was a beginning or not a beginning, right, so the Kalam argument asserts there was a beginning to the universe, and it backed that with evidence of the Big Bang. But that evidence now doesn't support a beginning to the universe. So if you want to tell me there was a beginning to the universe, if you believe the Kalam argument is a valid argument, you have to then present some evidence there was a beginning.
Yeah, no, I get all that.
And if a theory says there was a beginning, it should make predictions for things that we could observe, at least scientifically. So I don't see any predictions for a beginning that has been confirmed by any observations.
Okay. Again, I'm asking why you disagree with the other theories, and you keep going back.
Which other theories? Sorry, which other theories?
The other theories that you mentioned, from Alan Guth, all the other different theories.
So I'm not saying. So I think so. Inflationary cosmology from Alan Guth, I think, has some evidence for it. I think it's a powerful idea. So I think it's a good contender for what happened, but it doesn't tell us that the universe had a beginning. So whether I agree with inflation or disagree with inflation, it doesn't really matter, because even if inflation happened, it wouldn't tell us that the universe had a beginning or not.
In fact, for people who are a bit slow like myself, what's Alan Guth's? What was the theory?
So inflation is a theory that says the universe expanded exponentially. So we're talking about a doubling time of something like every 10 to the minus 37 seconds. So the universe doubled in size every 10 to the 10 trillionth of a trillionth of a second, something like that. I got that right. So it's got this incredibly rapid rate of expansion, and inflation is known to be eternal into the future. So it would seem to make an infinite number of universes.
Yeah.
But I don't think whether inflation happened or not. And it did make some predictions that have been confirmed by experiments. So it would seem to predict a flat universe, although there's disputes about that. But I think the consensus is it predicted a flat universe, and we do observe a flat universe. So there is, therefore, I think, some evidence for inflation. But there are other ways to get a flat universe. So I wouldn't stick my head out and say inflation is definitely true.
So you're just saying we don't have enough information in general?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So
yes.
You're not persuaded by the scientific evidence?
No.
But do you think there's...
I mean, out of interest, are you?
Yeah, I am.
Why?
But hold on a second.
Okay,
so,
sure.
Do you think that there's any other evidence for the second premise?
For the second premise?
Yeah.
There have been other... Yeah, there's been 2 other pieces of evidence. So the other is the second law of thermodynamics.
And what else?
And the other is the argument against the reality of infinity. So I think both of these are bogus arguments.
Okay, so what do you have a problem with the actual infinite argument? What's your problem with
Craig
that?
has presented it, and he said, to quote him in his debate with Christopher Hitchens, he said mathematicians recognise that the existence of an absolute infinity leads to self-contradictions. And the example he gave is that if you subtract infinity minus 3 and you subtract infinity minus 4, you get the same answer.
Yeah.
And therefore, infinity is contradictory. That was his argument that he gave. Now, that is just a bogus argument. And just to let you know, I've made a new film. It's on my channel, Skydive Film. And we have a lot of the world's leading philosophers of mathematics discussing this argument, including Adrian Moore, who is the editor of Mind, which I'm sure you know is probably the leading philosophy journal in the world. He's a co-editor of Mind. Okay, and he also is actually, he's basically saying this is nonsense. And we also have Daniel Isaacson, who is one of the world's leading logicians. He's a professor of the philosophy of mathematics at Oxford. And we go into these arguments. And we have various other philosophers involved. Alex Malpass, who's published some very brilliant papers in Mind and other journals.
Yeah, I recently had a discussion with him, actually.
Okay, right.
Have you seen it?
So I haven't seen that particular discussion, no. But basically, infinity subtraction from infinity is not well defined. But that doesn't mean that infinity is contradictory. And I wouldn't say no one, but virtually no one in mathematics thinks that leads to a contradiction. It just means it's not got a well-defined answer. And it's obvious that it shouldn't have a well-defined answer, and there's a reason for that. Because when you think about normal numbers, let's take 100, right? If I ask what's the whole number before 100, you can say, well, it's 99, right? There's a one lower than 100, okay? Yeah. But there can't be one lower than... So if I ask 100 minus 1, there's a very obvious answer, 99, right?
Yeah.
But if I ask what's 1 minus infinity, infinity is not a number like 100 is. It's something that, by definition, is endless. So it doesn't have a 1 less than, right? You can't ask what's 1 less. You can ask what's 1 less than 100, 99. But there's not 1 less than infinity, because infinity, by definition, is something that is endless.
It's a natural number.
Right, so similarly, now division by zero also doesn't have a well-defined answer. It doesn't follow from that zero is a contradictory concept. It just means that particular operation doesn't have a well-defined answer. But that doesn't mean that infinity is incoherent or contradictory.
Yeah, so do you think that you can reach infinity by successive addition?
You can't add up a bunch of finite numbers and then get an infinite number. I agree with that. But if I had an infinite number of times, what is the...
Infinite number of what, sorry?
It's an infinite amount of time. So in a finite number of steps, you can't go to the infinite. If I add up 2 plus 2 plus 2, and I keep going...
You'll never reach infinity.
I'm not going to just stop and get to infinity. But that doesn't contradict infinity, because infinity is saying there is no stopping point. That's what infinity means. It's
no
endless.
Stopping point for what, sorry?
For anything, right? It's endless. Infinity means endless. That's what infinity means.
Is it going in both directions or just one?
Well, you can define an infinity in both ways. You could define a line as having a start and going off in one direction, or you could define it in both. You could define a part. You could have a universe that has a beginning that is infinite into the future, and you could have a universe that is infinite into the future and to the past. Yeah,
but I'm saying the point we're at now, this moment right now, if we go from here back into the past, do you believe that an infinite amount of time has progressed or past?
Well, I'm not claiming the universe is past infinite. I'm saying we don't know. But what I am saying is there's no reason for...
But if it were past infinite, then that would be true, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't, because you're assuming that there's a beginning that's infinitely far away. But the hypothesis...
No. I didn't say there was a beginning. I never said there was a beginning. I said that an infinite amount of time would have already passed, an infinite amount of moments.
There would be an infinite number of moments, yes, I agree with that, yes.
Okay,
yes.
So if we go from this point backwards, right?
Yes. We won't get to a beginning, yes.
We won't get to a beginning.
If the past is infinite, yes.
Correct. But at each moment in the past, if we were to label those moments, how would you do it in a non-arbitrary fashion?
I'm not sure. Well, in relativity, you can't. There's no definite now in relativity, so you can't. There's no unique now. Luke Craig, who defends this argument, has had to modify relativity with something called a neo-Lorentzian interpretation of relativity. But I think, unless you do that, unless you abandon basically standard physics, there is no now that the universe has to get to. There just is no well-defined notion of now.
So you reject the A theory of time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most reasonable interpretation of relativity is to say it's standard relativity. In order to have a neo-Lorentzian view, you have to introduce some arbitrary reference frame, which I see no justification for.
So then you hold the stronger position that A theory is false?
No, I'm not saying it's false. I'm saying there's no reason to think it's true. And the standard view of relativity is that it's not true. And therefore, that's the most reasonable position to take at the moment.
I'm sorry, say that again, bro.
So I would say it's always conceivable that neo-Lorentzian relativity is correct. So I'm not saying it's necessarily false. But what I'm saying is there's no good reason to think that it's true. And the way the Kalam is generally presented with these arguments about getting to now sort of requires that.
Yeah, it assumes an A theory.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So if A theory is true, then do you think it's possible
Do I think it's possible what?
for there to have been an infinite amount of moments?
If the A theory is well, yeah, I think there could be an infinite number of moments.
Okay.
But I think in order to try and make the argument that Craig makes, it's a necessary requirement, or maybe necessary is too strong. Certainly the way he construes it, he relies on it. And since there's no evidence for it, we should not assent to it. That's my position.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is the A theory of time.
Go on, how so? No, what I'm saying is, no, it's not a contradiction because you don't. So you're assuming, I think, if I've understood your comment correctly. No, I didn't. If you start with a finite number and you keep adding, you won't in a finite time get to infinity. You're not going to get to the end of an endless process, obviously, because it's endless. You're right, because the hypothesis that the past is infinite is that there's no beginning. So it's not that you start at some moment in the past and have to get to infinity. It's always been infinite.
Yeah, so that's my question.
Yeah.
If we're at this point now and A theory is 2 and you go back into the past, at each moment would you have traversed an actual infinite?
Well, the question is, who is doing the traversing? So I think there's a problem there.
Okay, if we labeled the moments.
Yeah. Right, well, but there's an issue there because if I let's have a time machine and I go back, right? I go back and back and back.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, I have to travel from now, and my statement was, if the past were infinite, I could just keep going. I'm never going to get to a beginning point, right?
Yeah. No, I'm just saying if we were to label the moments.
Yeah.
If we were to label the moments, how would you label them?
Well, that's what I'm saying. You can't.
So
as far as I could know, there's no definite way to give an objective meaning to a now.
No. But I'm saying if you assume that A theory is true, because we're agreeing that the argument relies on A theory.
That's a fair point. Okay, that's a fair point. Okay, so well, you'd have to ask an A theorist that, to be honest. I mean, I guess they have to introduce a reference frame, and then they would label the points, and there would be an infinite number of them. Yeah. Yeah,
but I'm sorry. How would you label each one of them?
Well,
would they each be infinite?
They'd have to have some kind of clock, wouldn't they?
No.
Or would it be arbitrary?
What I'm saying, my point is, it would.
I'm not sure.
My point is, it would be completely arbitrary. Each moment in the past, if you were to label it, it would be completely arbitrary, whatever number you selected.
I'm not really sure. On the A theory, it's not arbitrary. As I understand it.
It would be, because if you had an infinite past from this moment going backwards, each moment, if you were to label it, and say I labeled it 5, I selected a particular moment and I labeled it 5.
Yeah.
What would be the reason for me labeling it 5? There is no sufficient reason.
Well, according to Craig, you can use cosmic time as a non-arbitrary clock. Now, I think he's wrong about that. But that's what he asserts, and I think that does. My understanding is that does follow from his view of relativity. Yeah. So you could use cosmic time. That's the time, like you measure since the Big Bang, as a non-arbitrary clock. Now, I think he's wrong about that, and in our film we explain why I think he's wrong about that.
Yeah.
But in his view, and he is, I think, the most well-versed defender of the Clark argument. Then that would be a non. But I'm not sure what the point of this is.
My point is that. The problem is that it goes against the PSR, or the principle of sufficient reasons. What that means is that each moment in the past, we cannot label it without appealing to something totally arbitrary. There's no reason, because, as you said, if from this moment going backwards into the past, an infinite amount of moments has already passed, then at what point do you reach infinity? There is no point.
No, you don't.
There is no point. Here's my point. There's no. There's no point in which you have traversed an actual infinite. It's always been traversed. Each moment that you keep going back and back in the past, you've already traversed an actual infinite.
You're going from the present into the past.
Yes.
So suppose you could time travel, or you could go from the present into the past.
Yeah.
If the past is endless, of course, you won't get to an end of it.
No.
By definition, it's endless.
We're not. No. You're missing my point.
So, okay, sorry.
You're missing my point.
Maybe I am.
My point is not getting back to a beginning, because there is no beginning.
Right.
That's not my point.
Okay.
My point is, from the endless past, going back and back and back, how would you label the moments? You would not be able to label the moments. It would be completely arbitrary. There would be no sufficient reason to ascribe one value to any moment.
I don't think that matters.
It does matter. And I've had a discussion with Malpass on this.
Sorry?
Because you can say how you can count the days that you
But you, okay, so let's
here,
suppose you can't label them. Let's just give that assumption.
Okay, but let me explain to you the point. The point is this, and I've discussed this with Alex Malpass, who you know he's a well-known philosopher. And this problem was presented, and he agreed, and he said basically it's just spooky. The fact of the matter is, at any moment, if you were to ascribe a value, in actual fact, you've already had an infinite amount of moments at every moment that has preceded this one.
Yes.
That's the problem.
Well, I don't see what the problem is.
Because you're supposedly traversing an infinite amount of time.
But you're not. But that's the thing, right? So this is the thing. In our example we gave, we imagine like
it's always been at infinity. That's the point.
Yes.
It's just like boom, infinite. It's always there.
But what's the problem with that?
Because the problem is that you know Alex Malpass's arguments on this.
Yes, of course I do.
Right. So what's Alex Malpass? What he's arguing? He's saying you can't end an endless series.
Yeah, correct.
But you can end a beginningless series.
Yeah.
Well,
that's his argument.
His argument is that you can end a beginningless series, and the point is, if you can end a beginningless series, why did you end at the moment that you did?
No, but
it's totally arbitrary.
Okay, personally, I don't see that. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, if it's arbitrary, I don't see that it matters. That's what
because it violates the PSR.
Well, okay, so that's a separate argument. That's not the.
No, that is the argument.
I don't agree with the principle of sufficient reason.
Okay, you don't.
No.
Why?
I think that's an assertion.
Why?
Because. But then we're going to get onto the principle of sufficient reason as a
no, but it's directly related to this.
That's going to change the subject, and
no,
I don't want to go there. Right? That's going to change the subject because now we're going to get onto the whole debate. As
that's the whole argument, brother.
If you agree with Alex Malpass, you have to argue why it's potentially possible to end a beginningless series.
Yes. Okay, no.
Now, Jake's presented an argument to say that you can't end a beginningless series because at every moment there is an actual infinite that's been traversed.
I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, okay? I'm agnostic about whether you can end a beginning of a series or not. So I'm not necessarily saying that's Alex.
My argument,
debate that with Alex.
I've already done it.
Okay, fine, but you're debating me.
Yeah, and I'm saying to you, I'm giving you an argument to show.
Yeah, but I don't assent to this assumption that you can. I don't know. I mean, I'm agnostic about that.
Yeah, well, I'm giving you an argument that you can't.
Right, but I don't agree with your argument.
Why? So you have to answer why.
It doesn't matter that.
Why doesn't it matter?
It matters whether you can get to the end of a beginning of a series.
Why doesn't it matter? Why?
Because all we want to know is the past beginningless or not? Okay, we want to know that. Okay, so what reasons? So the first thing you should do before you know anything is say, look, I don't know. Okay, so there you can ask what reasons have been given for the finitude of the past. Right? Have there been sufficiently good reasons to assert that? Okay?
Yeah.
So certainly I've mentioned the scientific ones. You've said you think they are good scientific reasons, but you haven't said what they are. And so straight away, I think the scientific case is completely flawed. Right? There's no good reason scientifically to think the universe had a beginning. And you've said that you think there are, but you haven't said what they are. Now you've said, then we go on to the philosophical argument.
Yeah, because I think they're stronger.
Okay, fine. You have to debate those with Alex, because I told you that my area of expertise is the second premise and the scientific one. Now, Alex asserts...
you didn't say that.
Fine, okay. But Alex makes his assertions, and you have to debate what Alex asserts with Alex.
But in order for you to make a scientific argument...
Sorry?
In order for you to make a scientific argument, you have to justify that it's philosophically possible to create an actual infinite.
And I don't see any reason why it isn't.
Well, I'm giving you one.
Okay, I don't...
Okay, so here's the thing.
Okay.
First... Just so the audience knows, you've approached me to discuss the Kalam.
Yeah, that's fine,
I didn't approach you to discuss
it. That's fine.
Then we specifically wanted to focus on the second premise.
Yeah.
Correct.
Fine,
You started bringing up scientific points.
Yes.
I said, well, is there other evidence for it? Because you're not persuaded by that. Me personally, I argue it primarily on philosophical grounds because I think they're stronger than the scientific ones.
So
now, if you don't like that, that's fine.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm happy to discuss the philosophy, but you can't just say, well, Alex Malpass said that, and therefore I should.
No, but I'm giving a reference for the argument because you mentioned Malpass first. I didn't know you were going to mention him.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'm just saying he was in a video.
And I did ask you, did you agree with Malpass? And you said yes.
I didn't say I agree with him on the state that the...
you understood his argument, and that's why I said his argument is this.
Did you see the way
beginningless...
Sorry?
Did you see the way he humiliated Malpass?
That's your assertion. That's your assertion. No,
he hasn't seen the video.
I don't agree with the principle of sufficient reason. I think the reason I don't agree with it, I mean, I guess you want to take that conversation there, and I think that's changing the subject. But ultimately, the principle of sufficient reason is just an assertion, right? There could be brute facts in the universe, and there's no reason to think that there can't be. So I just don't agree with the principle of sufficient reason. If your argument, that line of argument that you're using, needs a principle of sufficient reason, I just deny it.
So what's your theory then? If you reject the PSR, what's your theory?
Because there might be. I'm not saying there are brute facts, but you can't rule out brute facts, and therefore the principle of sufficient reason is not a good argument.
Do you have an alternative?
The alternative would be brute facts.
So that you have things that are contingent that have no explanation.
Yes.
No explanation whatsoever.
Well, there are. Yeah, that's what a brute fact is. That you get to you basically, just like I ask, what are you made of? You're made out of proteins. What are the proteins made out of? Made out of atoms. What are the atoms made out of? They're made of blah blah blah. Particle, neutrons and protons. What are the neutrons and protons made of? Made of quarks. And you could just say, well, everything has to be made out of something, but actually it turns out maybe not. Maybe there's a stopping point. So similarly, it's conceivable that when we ask for what caused this, why is there a reason for that? Why is there a reason for that? Why is there a reason for that? It might be, it's certainly conceivable.
There's no reason.
It could be. I'm not saying this is true. I'm not someone that. Sean Carroll asserts that there are brute facts, and I'm not making that assertion. I don't agree with him. But I think there could be.
But you understand the problem that you have when you turn around and say, "What are you made out of?" Ultimately, you're saying, there is no explanation as to what you're made out of.
No, that's not what I said. What I said
was... That's the implication of what you're saying.
Okay, hang on. So what I said, I'm trying to give an analogy of what you're made of. And generally, when I ask what you're made of this, it's made of that, it's made of that. And we could ask the question, does it go on forever? Or is there just a stopping point where you just say,
and there's no explanation at the stopping point. But the question is, what's the difference between that thing which you say bottoms out and the other things which you think you've explained? What's the relevant difference to say that justifies bottoming out and saying, well, this is just a brute contingent fact, and yet you need an explanation for those other things? Well, if you allow for that there, why can I say I don't need an explanation for this book?
Well, because you can always look for explanations and try and find them.
Exactly. Right? So what's the relevant difference in terms of the properties of this book versus the quark or whatever you say?
You could say exactly the same about what's the relative difference between what am I made of? Well, I'm made out of proteins, or they're made out of atoms. Or what is an electron made of? Well, an electron at the moment, given our best...
So why do they require explanations? And what I'm trying to get down to is you need a principle of explanation. You don't have to accept the PSR, but you need to have a theory in which you describe why it is that this book or the atoms that you're made of require an explanation, but something else doesn't. If you just say it's totally arbitrary, then...
No, I'm not saying it's totally arbitrary. What I'm saying is there may be... We can't assert that everything... So that's the problem. I observe that this is made of that, and this is made of that, and this is made of that. But I can't make the claim that everything has to continue in that case, right? So it could be there's something that doesn't have an explanation. That's conceivable, right? So therefore, but the principle of sufficient reason says no, it's inconceivable. It must be the case, and I just don't see why it must be the case.
Yeah, right? And my point to you is, what's the difference between that contingent thing that has the possibility of being left unexplained and all other contingent things which you think do require an explanation? What's the difference?
Okay, so what I think is that...
Do you think that any contingent thing requires an explanation?
I'm not sure there isn't even a necessary distinction between contingency and necessity, because...
So you think it's possible that everything is necessary?
It's conceivable that, let's suppose the universe is fully deterministic, right? In which case, I think the distinction between contingency and necessity is a meaningless one. Because if the universe is deterministic, which it might be, I'm not saying it isn't, it is, right? Then everything has to happen.
This is the problem.
So therefore, there's not even a So I'm not saying you can't distinguish between contingency and necessity. What I'm saying is that you can't assert that there must be. Right?
Yeah, but that chain, right? Even if you had that chain explained and there was a necessary link between everything in that chain, the chain itself, would that chain itself be necessary or contingent?
Well, it may be that the chain itself has no explanation.
Okay, so the chain itself of all of contingent reality has no explanation.
Ah, no, you're making a switch there. I am not saying this is the case.
No,
what
I'm saying is it possible?
It's conceivable.
Okay.
Yeah. But the problem is, see, now we've switched from the Kalam argument to a debate about the principle of sufficient reason.
No, because it's directly related to the second premise.
But you can see what I was trying to avoid, right? The whole conversation now is about the principle of sufficient reason.
Oh, if you don't want to talk about it, it's fine.
Well, I want to talk specifically about, the premises in the Kalam argument.
It is, but we understand that the evidence. No. Let's be honest.
Right?
The evidence for each.
To the contingency argument.
No, it's not. It's not.
It is.
The evidence for each one of the premises.
Yeah.
We went over it. We went through the philosophical argument.
So let's just go one by one.
Hold on. So my point is, we went through the scientific stuff.
No, but we didn't. You never responded to anything about the science. So you said that you agreed there was good scientific reasons, but you never said what they were.
No.
Why don't we hear
what I said was that I argue for the second premise based on philosophical grounds. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty weeds of the scientific theories.
So why should I get into the nitty-gritty of the
You don't have to, but you approach me.
Okay.
You approach me.
So, sorry, can we agree that I've given good reasons, I think. Let's just do one thing at a time. I'm happy to go to the philosophy if you want to concede on the science. Right?
I haven't conceded anything.
Right, so why can't we discuss the science then?
What do you mean?
Fundamentally,
it's not a scientific discussion. It's not a scientific
discussion.
It is.
It isn't, because the science rests upon certain philosophical assumptions.
Exactly.
And the philosophical assumptions have to be checked against reality. You think you could just dream up philosophical assumptions?
You can't dream up. But for example, let me give you an example of this. Do you need to investigate whether squared circles exist in reality or not?
No.
Right, why not?
Because there's a logical contradiction.
Right, so it's a logic. So what you're doing now is you've now got an understanding of what's necessity, what's impossibility, and what's possibility.
And so are you saying there's a logical contradiction?
And that's a philosophical.
Are you saying there's a logical contradiction with proof facts?
So that's a philosophical position that you hold.
Right, so you agree there's no logical contradiction?
He's explaining to you.
Apply, does it?
No, there's a philosophical position that underpins how we now understand our experience. So before you want to go into a discussion of the experience, whereas what we're saying, no, you need to go to the fundamental discussion.
What I don't want to
first.
do is change the topic from the Kalam to the principle of sufficient reason. That's a different debate.
But even if you want to go into the Kalam, the discussion is not what does the science say. The discussion will be about what does the fundamental rational axioms of philosophy that we're using.
You have said, okay, look, fine. We did discuss the philosophy. I said I don't agree with the principle of sufficient reason. Your philosophical argument is you need the principle of sufficient reason. I dispute that, right?
Yeah.
We have discussed that, right?
Yeah, so, and I'm telling you the problem, we're still working on the problems. The problem is that you're saying that there's one contingent thing which doesn't require an explanation.
No, I'm not saying there is.
No, we're saying it's conceivable. Yeah. Okay, if it's conceivable that there's a contingent thing that doesn't require an explanation.
But it's not necessarily contingent. Sorry.
What do you mean?
You finish.
Do you think it's necessary?
It could be that there's no meaningful distinction between contingencies. That's conceivable as well.
But this is the trouble I'm having. You're telling me all these different things of it could be or could not be, but you're not taking a position on anything.
That's a reasonable thing to do because we don't know.
So you don't know the difference between something that's necessary and something that's contingent?
I know the difference, but I'm not saying that the difference is necessarily meaningful.
Okay, do you think there is a difference?
Not necessarily. It depends on whether the determinism is true or not, and I don't know.
Okay, so you don't think that 1 + 1 = 2 and this book existing is any relevant difference?
Well, I think that I'll just restate my point. If determinism is true, then it's not meaningful to make a distinction between. Look, what does contingent mean? It means it could be something different.
Could be otherwise.
It could be otherwise. But if determinism is true, nothing could be otherwise.
Yes, it has nothing to do with it.
As necessity.
Yeah.
But explain to me, if determinism is true, how could things have been different?
Because the chain itself could have been different.
How do you establish that?
Oh my God.
Because then that comes down to discussion how you understand contingency.
Yeah.
What's your theory of contingency?
Exactly, because you talked before, you've used several times throughout this conversation, conceivability.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
Can we conceive of a different chain other than the one that exists?
Yeah, we can conceive it, but that doesn't mean it actually could exist.
Okay, then why have you been appealing to conceivability for the possibility thereof this entire conversation?
Because look, I can conceive of all kinds of things, but it doesn't mean that the fact that I can conceive
then why do you
means
keep
they have
saying,
any reality
but
to it.
this entire conversation you've been appealing to conceivability.
Because you have to say, I can conceive of something, right?
Does that mean it's possible?
Not necessarily. You have to.
Does it mean it's logically possible?
We can debate. No, the fact that you can conceive of something, right, means we can have a discussion about it, right? It doesn't mean that it necessarily follows from conceivability to reality.
I'm not saying it necessarily follows. I'm saying whether or not it's possible.
Well, again,
what's your theory when you're saying whether or not something is possible?
But statements about possibility depend on other statements, don't they?
Exactly. So what's your modal theory?
I'm not saying I know whether the universe has this distinction or not. It may do, it may not do, right? But what I'm saying is you can't assert between, let's say, contingency and necessity.
So the universe could be necessary.
It's certainly conceivable. Why not? Why couldn't the universe be necessary? Because
the fact that you say it could be conceivable, by that word renders it contingent.
No, okay. Tell me why the universe couldn't be necessary.
Because Josh is here, I want to speak to him.
If we understand contingency,
but we're not going to decide.
If we understand contingency, that which could be.
I know, but I got all this on me.
Are we saying the universe necessary could not be necessary? Then by definition, it could be otherwise.
No, I disagree. No, I disagree. Because, okay, let's put it this way: I could conceive of the fact that when I leave here, I'm going to teleport to Sydney. Right? I could conceive of that. But it turns out in reality that can't happen. Okay? So the fact that I can conceive of it, so what I'm saying is there is a distinction. There are laws of physics that decide, and there's a reality about the world that decides what can and can't happen.
Yeah, but
that is not the same as that's what I'm saying. That's not the same as that I can imagine it happening.
Yeah, but that's not contingent necessary.
But the problem is, we don't know necessarily what the laws are.
No, that's not the difference.
We don't know what is allowed and not allowed. Right? That's a distinction I'm going to make.
We're going to have to wrap it up because I do have to speak with somebody else.
For 5 minutes, right? We've talked about the philosophy a lot. So can I ask you, you did say that you assented to the scientific case for the beginning to the universe. So given in our last 5 minutes, could you not say one thing to defend that view, given that you said you thought it was correct?
Defend what view?
The scientific view that the universe had a beginning.
Yeah.
What is the evidence for that?
The BGV theorem is one.
The BGV theorem?
Yeah.
So, all right, so here's what I would recommend. Why does the BGV theorem prove the universe had a beginning?
I didn't say that it proves it.
Well,
based on certain assumptions, it follows.
Which assumptions?
Well, my point to you is this, okay? Let me finish. The BGV theorem, certain things like the cosmic microwave background, the idea of the law of thermodynamics, all of these points, I think, are evidence for the fact that the universe had a beginning. Now, you dispute that. You think they're all bad, but you've heard them before. So me explaining to you again...
Okay. But no, if someone asserts... I'm sure you've heard philosophical discussions as well. So let me just respond to those 3 pieces of evidence.
Yeah.
So in our video, please Google... Skydive Phil, Kalam argument, you'll see our new video. We have Alan Guth and Alex Valenkin, who I've both personally interviewed, right? Basically say the BGV theorem does not prove the beginning to the universe. All it does is show that inflation cannot avoid a singularity. It shows there's a beginning to inflation, but it doesn't prove the beginning to the universe. That's just not true. You could easily have a collapsing universe and then an expanding universe. So there's no reason at all to think that BGV theorem proves the universe has a beginning. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, the cosmic microwave background. The cosmic microwave background tells you that the universe was in a very hot, dense state. I don't disagree with that. But if there was a collapsing universe and then it expanded, which is what Gamow, one of the fathers of the Big Bang Theory, thought was the case, it would also give you a CMB. So that doesn't give you any evidence at all that there was a beginning to the universe.
You know what, I get the impression you really want to get this discussion onto the science.
That is my area of interest, yes.
And what we're saying is actually, or what Jake's saying is specifically, This got nothing to do with the science. The science really doesn't solve the problem at all.
I think you want to get away from the science, right?
No, it's not about getting away from the science.
Because you've just given some evidence.
The problem that you have.
Hang on, could I not just respond to the third piece of evidence?
The problem that you, I think, to be honest, I'll be honest, I'm not interested. Jake, are you interested in listening to his
I will admit that my area of interest is more the science and the philosophy.
I'll admit that.
Not really.
But I'll admit that. I'm not gonna pretend that's the case, right?
What's that?
I'm not absolutely happy to admit that.
When
you're happy to admit what?
When you're critiquing the KCA, you have to critique it based upon its strongest arguments. What you can't do is you can't use it as a way to critique it based upon supportive arguments.
So you're saying the scientific, so you agree the scientific argument is weaker, right?
The scientific arguments have always been perceived as supportive arguments.
Everything varies.
Because if you're talking about from William Lane Craig in the modern sense, this argument goes back in the Islamic tradition, which was.
Well, it goes older than this.
Yeah, but here's my point. It was primarily based on philosophical argumentation, not scientific argumentation.
You can argue.
So that's what we're representing.
Okay, fine. You can argue any. And I have discussed philosophy. I haven't.
You can argue any quote unquote potential model and science. But what you really have to deal with are the philosophical arguments.
Okay.
If you can't deal with the philosophical arguments, so one of his arguments that he used to talk about the problem of a beginningless series ending, which you agree, I think you disagree with that, don't you? Disagree?
He said he's agnostic. He's agnostic on everything.
So it's because it's possible.
I don't know. All I'm saying is it
possible? Is it possible? I'm not saying is it probable. I'm saying is it possible?
I don't know.
So you don't know whether it's possible or not.
I am not.
You don't know if it's possible or impossible.
Okay. I don't know how many more times I can say I don't.
No. Because I'm asking it very specifically.
I know, I'm asking you more specific.
So you don't know if it's impossible or possible. Have you got any way of determining what is considered impossible?
Of course, you can have. Sorry. Okay.
Go on.
Hang on. Sorry. Before I answer, I want to finish the response I had in because you interrupted me.
No, because I think, to be honest, I think it's a bit of a red herring.
Keep interrupting me.
It's a red herring.
If you're going to keep interrupting me, then there's no conversation, is there?
So, Phil, it's a red herring argument.
I have to get going anyway.
You just keep interrupting me, right?
I'm sorry.
How many times are you going to interrupt me?
You can finish your point. Go on.
Thank you.
Just make your closing statement, Phil, please.
Okay. Right. We've already.
Somebody's waiting to speak to me.
Okay, fine. Right.
I'm waiting to speak to him. Go.
Interrupting again. Okay. So, right. I want to finish the point that you made.
Yeah, make your third point.
So the third point was thermodynamics, okay? Thermodynamics does not give any evidence to the beginning of the universe, right? Why not? Because it assumes, let me explain to the argument to the audience, it assumes that if the idea was, if we have a beginning to the universe, right, then we would get to a maximal state of entropy, and therefore, the fact that we're not in a maximal state of entropy, therefore the universe must have had a beginning. That argument doesn't work for two reasons. First off, it assumes that there is a finite maximal entropy. But if you have, let's say, an eternally inflating universe, and you can go into our videos to explain this, there is no necessary maximal entropy point. So you can't, there's no getting to it, right? Second off, we know the universe was in a very low entropy state, okay? The question is why? There are various theories that would tell you that the Big Bang was driven to a low entropy state from some other state. Therefore, it's not necessarily true that second law of thermodynamics gives you a beginning to the universe. So the three pieces of evidence you gave are not good evidences. Okay. Now, just to finish up, you're always basically saying, well, yeah, you want to talk about the science, but the science is irrelevant. We want to talk about the philosophy. We have talked about the philosophy. It's not my area of expertise. I'm going to admit that, right? But basically, I think your philosophical argument relied on the principle of sufficient reason, and I don't think we have to.
On what position? On what position did Jake make up on the principle of sufficient reason?
He basically came to a contingency argument.
No. What position? Yeah. What was the position?
He basically said that if you have an endless stream, as I understand the argument.
I didn't say endless, but go on, Karen.
Did you not?
No, we were talking about actual infinity, and we were talking about having a series which is beginningless and ends.
Yeah, but I don't think, that's why I disagree with Alex. I don't think it has any meaning to say that the series ends.
No, but you don't understand what Alex is saying. Why are you bringing that up?
Okay, that's fine, because that's not my area of expertise.
You haven't spoken
You debate
about
that with Alex.
Because
you were debating the position initially. Anyway.
Yeah. I'll defend the argument.
So where did the principle of sufficient reason come in when Jake was mentioning it at this point?
Well, as I understand it, right, he basically was saying if you have an endless series, right, you've got to have a reason.
Not endless. He didn't use endless.
beginningless. But I don't see what's the difference.
Exactly, but Alex Malpasses, here's the point. No, hold on a second. You initially brought up Malpass, maybe just in passing, but because I've spoken to him recently, that's why I targeted. The fact is, he has an entire paper which is meant to dispute what you just said. That Craig's arguments, he says, assumes what's called an endless series, a series which ends, right? And you're flip-flopping it. The way we're talking now, okay, you're flip-flopping it. He says that you can have a meaningless series that ends. That's his whole argument.
Maybe false. I don't know.
His whole
that's
argument.
Alex to defend. I'm not saying that's
exactly.
true or false.
So the point
All
is
I'm saying is that the denial of the Kalam doesn't require.
So where does the PCR come in?
Right?
Where does the PCR
require that.
Yeah, but
where does the PCR come in? Where does the PCR?
You're going to keep with the same
PSR. The reason why I'm coming
because we want to know if you understand the point.
Exactly.
Okay, my point is the Kalam. My dissent of the Kalam doesn't require that statement. Okay.
What do you mean?
Statement?
That you can end a beginningless series, right?
Okay.
Right. That my critique doesn't require that to be true or false. Alex can defend that, and he may be right. Okay.
I'm just trying to understand.
Right?
I'm just trying to understand whether you understood the argument.
It's not about me. Okay.
No, because
we're talking.
Okay. No. But my point is, he may be right or wrong about that. He can defend that, right? But my criticism is not dependent on that.
What's your criticism of what?
What I've been saying is there's not good evidence, and you haven't presented any evidence for a beginning to the universe.
I have.
You haven't.
I have.
You haven't.
I have. How about you? How about you give your closing statement, and I'll give mine.
My closing statement, okay, is.
I thought he gave his closing statement, Jay.
Okay.
Well, he was finishing his third point. I'm being generous.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you want to have the last word, right?
I can finish if you want me to finish first.
You can throw a coin. How's that?
Okay. So the way I see this conversation is you've approached me. You wanted to speak about a very specific point. I was meaning to defend the Kalam and the second premise primarily on philosophical grounds. I never made any claims about trying to defend it scientifically. This was what you brought up.
Yeah.
Okay. So I primarily defend the Kalam when I do, and I don't even use it really, to be honest, as a primary argument, based on philosophical grounds. Now, for you said that that's not your area, which is fine. There's no problem with that.
Okay.
But the fact of the matter is that there are strong philosophical arguments against an actual infinite by successive addition. One of the ones that we went into is the idea of what Malpass says, that you could have a beginningless series which ends. The problem is with that is, why does it end when it does? And any moment that precedes that, if you were to label it, would be totally arbitrary and would violate the PSR. Okay, and that's when we went into the conversation of what you discussed. Well, you don't accept the PSR. I asked for your theory. You said you don't have an alternative theory. You're agnostic on it. Then we talked about modality. You don't have a theory of modality. So really, from my perspective, I don't think we can get too far, because you're coming from a scientific angle, which is fine. You can have your angle to the argument, but I'm coming from primarily a philosophical angle, which in the Islamic tradition, that's how the argument is represented, and that's how I defend the argument. Now, science itself has undergirding philosophical assumptions, and so for me, the metaphysics of it and philosophy is more primary than the science itself, and that's why I argue based on these terms.
Right, okay. So to sum up, it's certainly true that I did ask for a debate on the Kalam, and I didn't hide the fact that the scientific area was the area that I am more interested in. And I think I've given reasons to show that the scientific arguments for the Kalam are not valid reasons. And I think there's been very little discussion about that. So I hope that the audience will get that there is not strong scientific reasons to believe the universe had a beginning. Now, on the philosophical argument, I have engaged on the philosophical argument. I haven't said I won't discuss philosophy.
I didn't say that.
I know you didn't.
Guys, can you wrap up in 5 minutes?
Yeah, this is his last statement.
1 minute.
Literally his last statement.
We basically got down to whether the principle of sufficient reason is valid or not. And I basically said, I don't see that.
You said you don't know, basically.
Right. I think
you don't know whether the
brute
facts.
And please don't interrupt my closing statement, please. Right. I think brute facts are a perfectly reasonable alternative to the principle of sufficient reason, and therefore the philosophical argument that you ran doesn't really work because we have a perfectly reasonable alternative.
Thank you, Phil. And
All right.
closing statement?
Thanks very much.
I already gave it. Yeah, that's
You gave it
fine.
already, yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you very
Have you
much.
heard my closing statement?
No.
Assalamu alaikum.
But one last thing, if you want to go more into the philosophy and the science, our new video.
Yeah, but
has that.
you need
Okay.
you need to address the actual argument.
I have.
You're not
I
addressing
have.
the argument. What you're doing is
Maybe
going
bring
around the
Malpass on to discuss the point that we talked about.
discuss that with Mal.
No, I'm saying, but maybe you'll learn something from what he has to say.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. Okay. Maybe listen to Alan Guth and Alex Villink and you may learn something.
Yeah, but that's irrelevant.
It's not
to the
irrelevant.
argument.
It isn't irrelevant.
If a person believes that an actual infinite cannot be formed by successive addition is a logical impossibility or a metaphysical impossibility, then any scientific discussion cannot engage
You're assuming
in that.
metaphysical impossibility is a reasonable, well-defined thing, but I would dispute that. I don't think metaphysical impossibility can be
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much.